Hey guys, tonight we drift across a dark ocean, where the stars wheel above you like glittering lanterns hung by unseen hands. And you can almost hear the whisper of ancestors, who once used those constellations as maps. The salt air clings to your skin, and you realize that for the Polynesian islanders, desire itself was a compass, a force as natural and necessary as the trade winds. It's a little unsettling, isn't it? To imagine that entire civilizations believed sex wasn't shameful or hidden, but instead a literal gift from the gods, something to celebrate, practice, and weave into the fabric of daily life. You probably won't survive this comparison, but just think, while your ancestors were scolding their kids for holding hands, islanders were teaching theirs how to flirt in the moonlight as though it were a sacred rite of passage. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And don't forget, I'd love for you to drop your location and the time you're listening down in the comments. I really do smile when I see where these stories wander. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The canoe nudges the lagoon shore, and the sand is warm under your toes. You wander inland where the sound of drums grows louder, a pulse that seems to echo inside your chest. Firelight flickers across painted bodies, dancers moving in spirals that mimic the tides, hips rolling in rhythms that seem to call both laughter and reverence. You notice how no one looks away, no one hides their smile. Here intimacy isn't a secret, it's theater, ritual, and offering. The myths tell you that the god Tangaroa shaped the seas from his own longing, that the goddess Hina bathed in moonlight until it soaked her skin, and gifted mortals with the power to join flesh and spirit. And as you listen, it dawns on you that in this world, shame is the foreign language, not pleasure. One story drifts forward, a legend retold with that sing-song cadence Polynesians use when memory is precious. It describes a high chief who courted not with jewels, but with carved poems etched into driftwood, handed to lovers in secret coves. These poems, historians still argue whether they were purely symbolic or direct instructions for intimacy, suggest that erotic creativity was as valued as canoe craft or farming. That makes you chuckle, imagining modern dating apps reduced to carved planks and poetic metaphors about coconuts. But the seriousness in their telling leaves no doubt. These were instructions blessed by the gods. As the night air thickens, you catch a whiff of roasted breadfruit and honey dripping over stones, a reminder that every celebration married feasting with flirting. Even the act of breaking a coconut together was charged with innuendo, the split shell compared to divine union. And because you're sitting here in the 21st century with your earbuds in, it feels almost surreal to realize that once upon a time, somewhere between Tahiti and Hawaii, sex wasn't just biology or recreation. It was woven into every meal, every myth, every ceremony under the stars. One quirky tidbit you can't ignore: crocodile dung was once used by Egyptians as primitive contraception. And while Polynesians didn't exactly scoop reptile leftovers into their rituals, they did experiment with herbal concoctions to time births around the lunar cycle. Scholars debate if these were effective or mostly symbolic, but it adds a layer of human ingenuity to the cosmic romance. You could almost picture some poor apprentice tasked with grinding leaves while couples laughed. Nearby, hardly a thankless job when you think of the context. The deeper you breathe, the more it feels like time has slowed. The drums steady, the fire flares, and you sense that these islanders never divided the sacred from the sensual. For them, each kiss, each touch, was both a prayer and a proof of belonging, a way of telling the gods, we remember what you gave us. And in that thought, drifting further into their world, you begin to feel the soft gravity of sleep tugging at your mind, like a tide pulling you into the unknown. The night lengthens, and you find yourself following the sound of laughter down to a crescent of white sand where the ocean curls in and out like a sleeping giant's breath. The beach alive with torches planted in the sand, casting wavering circles of gold on bodies, moving to rhythms older than memory. Here ritual and celebration blur, so completely that you can't tell if you're witnessing a religious festival or the world's most elaborate date night. But for Polynesians, there was never a need to separate the two. Young men and women dance, in arcs that echo the waves, arms sweeping like gulls in flight, hips rolling with the pulse of the drums. And when they lock eyes, it is as though the gods themselves lean in to watch. There's no awkward shuffle, like at your high school dance. No giggling in corners. Instead, the whole village treats the spectacle as sacred theater. You feel almost guilty being an outsider, yet the openness draws you in, reminding you that in this culture, desire wasn't hidden behind curtains, but celebrated under the moon. A priest begins to chant, his voice low, weaving tales of deities, who disguised themselves as mortals to test the hearts of lovers. Historians still argue whether these chants were coded lessons in fertility or purely mythic entertainment. But either way, the effect is mesmerizing. You watch as couples answer. They chant with their own playful verses, a back-and-forth teasing that works as both flirtation and worship. Somewhere nearby, a woman passes a shallow bowl of fermented breadfruit drink, the tang making you cough, and she laughs, a sound that feels both intimate and communal. One authentic story surfaces, the tale of a Tahitian queen who kept lovers, chosen not for their wealth, but for their ability to compose clever verses on the spot. Eleanor Herman would have called it a game of wit-turned-erotic challenge, a reminder that power and pleasure often danced hand in hand. You imagine her court, full of suitors sweating over rhyme schemes, desperate to prove their worth, while she reclined like a goddess, judging offerings more creative than gold. It's cheeky, yes, but it makes you grin at how universal human games of attraction really are. A quirky tidbit slips in, too. Some islanders believed that the scent of certain flowers, particularly the tiari blossom, could inspire irresistible desire if worn at the ear. Picture a young man nervously tucking one behind his head, praying it worked as well as advertised. And you realize perfume counters are just the modern continuation of this same hopeful magic. The drums quicken, the sand grows hot under bare feet, and couples drift off 2 by 2 toward the tree line, where shadows swallow them. No one calls them back, no one scolds. In fact, elders smile knowingly, for they see the continuation of divine gifts, not scandal. The European in you wants to categorize it as indecent, but the island whispers otherwise. Intimacy here is currency, blessing, entertainment, and cosmic alignment all rolled together. You glance up and notice the moon at its peak, casting silver across the lagoon, and it strikes you that timing was everything. Many of these rituals aligned with lunar cycles, as if the heavens themselves were calendars of fertility and love. The soft scrape of waves punctuates the laughter, and in that sound, you realize how different life feels when nothing about your body is considered shameful. Historians debate endlessly about how much of this openness survived after European contact, whether modern retellings romanticize what were once stricter customs. But for the moment, you are standing barefoot on sand, where boundaries between myth and flesh dissolve. Someone offers you roasted fish wrapped in leaves, its smoky sweetness unexpected, and you think of how meals themselves were preludes to intimacy, food and flesh intertwined in the same ritual. You chuckle, realizing dinner and a show has never gone out of style. And as you take in the mingled scents of firewood, flowers, and salt, the night presses closer, heavier, as though the island itself wants you to surrender to its slow rhythm. You sense the story moving with you, drawing you deeper into a world where desire is sacred and laughter is prayer, and the beat of the drums carries you like a heartbeat toward the edge of dreams. As the torches fade behind you, you wander into The heart of the village, where carved wooden posts mark out the meeting grounds, and mats woven from pandanus leaves are spread across the earth like invitations. Tonight is not only about dancing, it is also about lineage, and here intimacy is. Never just between two people, it is the invisible rope tying generations together. You see the high chief arrive, his cloak woven with red feathers shimmering in the firelight, and beside him, a group of young nobles who carry themselves with practiced ease. Their marriages, you learn, are more than matters of the heart. They are strategic unions meant to preserve bloodlines, bind families, and keep divine favor shining on the clan. Historians still argue whether these alliances were strictly political or genuinely passionate, but the islanders' stories suggest both could be true, that desire itself was harnessed as a tool of governance. You picture the scene. A young woman from one noble line sings her genealogy in front of the crowd, tracing her roots back to a god who once walked these shores, and the young man chosen for her responds with his own chant, their voices weaving a braid of authority and attraction. The crowd murmurs approval, not because the pair looks romantic in a modern sense, but because they embody cosmic balance. This is no royal wedding staged for foreign tabloids. This is survival, prestige, and sacred duty dressed up as flirtation. An authentic story whispers through the night about a Hawaiian alii, a high-ranking chief who took lovers not only for pleasure, but as a way of redistributing mana, the spiritual energy believed to flow through intimacy. The Kama Sutra might have described sex as a path to cosmic union, but here it also meant political harmony. Each embrace a literal transfer of power. You chuckle, imagining a modern politician trying to justify affairs by claiming they were. Sharing sacred energy for the good of the people, it wouldn't fly on Twitter, but on this beach, it was gospel. A quirky detail surfaces as well. Some Polynesians believed that twins were especially blessed, the product of extraordinary passion between parents, and families with twins were often given higher esteem. That tiny twist in biology became a badge of prestige, a reminder that desire could shift not only hearts, but whole hierarchies. The feast continues, and roasted pig is lifted from an earth oven, the steam fragrant with taro leaves, while storytellers circle the gathering with chants that remind everyone of ancestral unions, both divine and mortal. You realize that in this world, sex was less about individual satisfaction and more about weaving everyone into a cosmic net. To deny intimacy would be to weaken the ties of community, almost an act of rebellion against the gods. Historians debate whether jealousy ever troubled these arrangements, whether chiefs' lovers competed for favor in hushed corners, but the chants focus on balance, suggesting harmony was always the ideal. You sip from a coconut shell passed your way, the liquid sweet and sharp, and watch as young couples slip glances at one another, their futures perhaps already mapped by elders negotiating quietly nearby. It's both beautiful and unsettling. The thought that your body and desires could belong as much to your lineage as to yourself. Yet the softness in the air, the warmth of hands clasped during chants, makes it clear that affection was not absent. Love could bloom even within the strictest of arrangements, and when it did, the gods were said to smile. Somewhere in the shadows, you notice an elder telling a tale of a forbidden union, two lovers from rival clans who met secretly by the river. Their discovery threatened to spark war, but instead their passion was interpreted as a sign that the gods wished the clans united. That single act of defiance became the foundation for a dynasty. You grin at the irony. What might have been scandal in one world turned into destiny in another. The night thickens, the drums slow to a gentle heartbeat, and you feel the weight of centuries pressing in. The air hums with the sense that sex here was never trivial, never merely private. It was heritage, obligation, and worship braided together. And as the stars shift overhead, you find yourself drifting into that rhythm, carried along by chance that remind you lineage is not just blood, but the echo of every embrace blessed by the gods. The first thing you notice when dawn breaks is the scent, the mingling of smoke from last night's fires with the sweetness of crushed blossoms scattered across the paths. And you realize that in this world, even chores carry the fingerprints of the divine. You wander through the village and see women pounding breadfruit with a rhythmic grace, each thud of the pestle echoing like a drumbeat, while men carve canoes whose curved prows seem almost alive. But the part that catches your breath is how these daily labors are laced with flirtation and ritual, as though the gods themselves demanded that desire be stirred into every task. A young man teases a girl weaving mats, slipping a shell bracelet into her pile of reeds, and she hides a smile that tells you this is no casual prank, but a signal understood by everyone watching. Historians still argue whether these gestures were coded marriage proposals or simply everyday play, but either way the effect is the same. Even work comes with anticipation. And then there are the feasts, where preparation itself becomes a stage. You watch as a pig is lowered into the earth oven, wrapped in taro leaves glistening with coconut cream, and you notice how the cooks exchange glances that carry as much heat as the fire below. Food here isn't just survival, it's foreplay sanctified, each bite meant to honor both body and spirit. An authentic tale rises up like steam, the story of a Samoan chief who fell for a woman renowned not for her beauty, but for the way she prepared fish. Her seasoning, said to have been whispered to her by the goddess of the reef, made him swear eternal loyalty, a reminder that desire doesn't always flare in temples, but can begin at the hearth. Eleanor Herman would probably have chuckled at how power often surrendered not to jewels or politics, but to a perfectly grilled catch of the day. A quirky detail floats through the morning air. Some Polynesian healers recommended rubbing coconut oil not only to protect from sun, but to enhance allure, leaving skin gleaming under torchlight. You smirk at the thought of ancient islanders inventing their own body lotion industry centuries before modern advertisements, proof that vanity has always been a sacred pastime. You imagine the glistening shoulders of dancers, their bodies catching firelight like statues carved of honey, and you understand why the gods were believed to linger at these gatherings. Everywhere you look, intimacy is present, but never vulgar. Is the undercurrent, the joke shared between friends, the blessing whispered before sleep. Historians debate whether these rituals of labor and love survived untouched into the missionary era, or if much of what we imagine has been stitched together from fragments. But the continuity of song and craft suggests that desire has always found ways to endure. The canoes slide into the lagoon, their hulls catching the early sun, and the men test their paddles while women cheer from shore, laughter carrying across the water. It strikes you that even canoe races were sometimes preludes to courtship, with the winner claiming not just victory, but the right to sit beside a chosen partner at the evening feast. You grin at the image of romance sparked by splashing oars, and competitive pride, proof that no human activity is too mundane to become a stage for attraction. As you settle on a mat to taste fresh fruit, you notice the quiet way elders nod approval at the younger ones' games, their silence and acknowledgement. That divine gifts need no lecture. The papaya is soft, its juices running down your hand, and you laugh softly, realizing the fruit itself has long been used as metaphor in songs about love. Even your snack is part of the ritual, and suddenly nothing feels ordinary anymore. The day grows warmer, cicadas buzz, and you sense that here the gods are not confined to temples or chants. They linger in every woven mat, every paddle stroke, every shared meal. You breathe in the humid air and think how strange it feels that in your own world, chores are burdens, but here they shimmer with invitation. You begin to wonder if that's the secret, that the Polynesian view of sex as a divine gift wasn't confined to bedrooms or festivals, but infused into every corner of life. And as that thought settles, you realize you're caught now, curious, almost envious, unable to look away, wondering what other surprises await as the drums call you forward once again. By the time the sun dips low again, casting a molten path across the lagoon, you are led toward a cluster of carved stone platforms, where the air thickens with incense and the shadows of idols stretch long and solemn. This is the place where intimacy and divinity collide most directly. The sacred temples where Kapu, the strict taboos govern every gesture, every glance, every touch. You tread softly, because even the wrong footstep might be seen as defiance. Against the gods. The priests stand near altars, draped with tapa cloth, their bodies painted in geometric patterns that seem to ripple in the firelight, and their chants rise like smoke, weaving warnings and promises. Here sex is not frivolous. It is a test, a trial, a sacred gift that can bless or curse, depending on whether you honor the rules. Historians still argue whether certain acts inside temple grounds were performed by priests to channel divine power, or whether those talis were embroidered later by scandalized missionaries. But the ambiguity itself is part of the allure. You will never quite know where devotion ended and desire began. An authentic story is whispered in your ear, that of a young Hawaiian priestess who was chosen to embody the goddess Laka during a festival. She would dance slowly before the idol, her movements both worship and seduction, and afterward she was believed to carry the goddess's blessing into the arms of a mortal partner selected for the ritual. Foucault might say this was the perfect example of sexuality as power, an institution wielding intimacy as a tool to shape society. You imagine the priestess shimmering with oil, her hair loose like a curtain, the crowd hushed as if waiting for a lightning strike, and you can almost feel the tension of that night centuries ago. A quirky tidbit intrudes. Did you know that in some islands, sneezing during a sacred chant was considered a sign of divine interruption? Imagine the pressure, standing there during a ritual so charged with intimacy and cosmic weight, trying not to let a single tickle betray you. The thought makes you smile, a reminder that even the most profound ceremonies still left room for human clumsiness. Yet the weight returns when you hear about the kapu that forbade certain unions, where a man and woman of different ranks could be punished with death for loving one another without permission. These rules were not simply jealous restrictions, but woven into cosmic balance, ensuring the gods' gifts were not squandered or polluted. It chills you, the thought that passion so natural could also be seen as dangerous, and that lovers might risk everything for one night together. Historians debate fiercely whether the severity of these punishments has been exaggerated, whether colonial writers projected their own obsessions with sin onto Polynesian customs. But even in doubt, you sense the gravity of the system. You take in the carved idols, their eyes wide, mouths stern, and you feel as though they are watching you even now, measuring whether you understand that intimacy here is holy fire. It can warm, or it can burn. The drums slow, the chants soften, and a priest pours liquid over the stones, murmuring words that dissolve in the wind. Around you, villagers bow their heads, but there is no shame in their posture, only reverence, as though they are acknowledging that desire is not owned by mortals, but borrowed from the gods. You recall the earlier laughter on the beach, the teasing glances during canoe races, and now you see how it all folds back into this central truth. Every act of passion is simultaneously a gamble and an offering. You swallow against the heaviness in your throat, realizing that here love was never casual. It was duty, risk, joy, and worship braided together until no one could separate them. And as the torches flicker and the stars sharpen overhead, you feel the shiver of awe, the quiet thrill of standing in a place where the boundaries between flesh and spirit blur, so thin that you might stumble across divinity with a single kiss. The hush of the temple lingers in your chest, long after you leave. But as you walk toward the shore, you hear a different sound, rougher, unfamiliar, the clatter of boots against planks, and the creak of sails straining against the wind. The outsiders have arrived. You stand among islanders whose faces flicker between curiosity and unease as European ships drop anchor just beyond the reef, their masts stabbing the sky like unwelcome trees. For a people who had always treated intimacy as a gift from the gods, these newcomers bring more than just trade goods. They carry strange rules, alien eyes, and a heavy cloud of judgment. You watch as sailors row ashore, sunburned men with beards tangled by salt, and at first the encounters feel playful, almost like another festival. Trinkets of iron and glass are exchanged for fruit. Laughter rolls across the sand, and even flirtation sparks between locals and strangers. But then you catch the way some of the sailors whisper behind their hands, mocking customs they barely understand, and the first shadows of misunderstanding fall across the beach. Historians still argue whether early contact was more curious than hostile, or whether the seeds of repression were planted from the start, but the tension is unmistakable. An authentic account rises from those first meetings. Missionaries later wrote of their shock at dances that combined worship with sensual movement, describing them as sinful spectacles to be stamped out. Peter Webb would have countered that. Erotic spirit was woven into all human ritual, and the Polynesians simply acknowledged it openly, unlike the West, which hid it behind pews and curtains. You picture those missionaries grimacing, clenching their Bibles, while islanders laughed under moonlight, unable to fathom why anyone would fear joy. A quirky moment occurs when one sailor, bewildered by a garland of flowers placed around his neck by a young woman, threw it into the sand, thinking it a trap of sorcery. The girl's laughter echoed across the lagoon, and you can't help but chuckle too, realizing how easy it is for gifts of affection to be mistaken for curses when worldviews collide. Yet the humor fades quickly, because with the outsiders comes pressure, rules, and the gradual silencing of chance that once filled the air. You notice how the elders grow more guarded, how dances that once unfolded openly on beaches slip into private gatherings hidden from prying eyes. Missionaries preach fire and damnation, and young islanders are taught to feel shame where none existed before. The gods who once blessed every embrace are suddenly called false idols, their temples dismantled stone by stone. Historians debate the extent of suppression, whether islanders resisted fiercely or adapted quietly. But either way, you can feel the weight of loss pressing in. Imagine being told that the very heartbeat of your culture, the way you dance, love, and worship, was a sin. You shiver at the thought, anger curling in your chest, but then you remember the resilience you've already seen in stories. Even as ships crowd the horizon and foreign laws seep inland, the islanders find ways to preserve fragments of their heritage. A whispered chant here, a secret dance in the forest, lovers meeting by the lagoon under cover of night. The gods may have been renamed, but their echoes still stir in the air. You breathe in the salt and smoke, noticing how the beach feels different now, heavier with silence, yet stubbornly alive. Couples still glance at each other when they think no one is looking. Children still chase each other laughing, and the ocean still roars like a guardian that no outsider can command. You realize you are watching the collision of two worlds, one that treats sex as divine generosity, and another that chains it with guilt. It is messy, tragic, and deeply human. And as the sails catch the wind again, carrying strangers further down the archipelago, you wonder which vision of intimacy will endure, the one whispered by missionaries in stiff collars, or the one sung by dancers under the moon. You wake to the sound of waves slapping stone, softer than applause yet insistent, as though the ocean itself refuses to let stories sink. The missionaries may have carried their rules ashore, but the islanders carried resistance in their bones. And you see it most clearly in the way tailies slip past silence. At dusk, while villages feign obedience to new prayers, children gather around grandparents who whisper chants older than memory, each word a seed planted against forgetting. You lean closer, the firelight catching the wrinkles on an elder's face as she recites a legend of lovers who defied Kapu by meeting in a cave hidden by the tide. When their secret was discovered, rather than punish them, the gods transformed the cave into a shrine so that generations could hear the surf as a hymn of forbidden love made sacred. Historians still argue whether this story reflects an actual event or a metaphor stitched together during colonial crackdowns, but its persistence suggests resilience cloaked in myth. You can't help but smile at the thought of romance, smuggled in folklore, safe from censors. One authentic example comes from Eleanor Herman's accounts of European courts, where kings kept mistresses whose power often rivaled queens, their stories surviving in rumor even when records tried to erase them. It feels the same here, whispers, acting as rebellion, intimacy recorded in memory rather than parchment. A quirky tidbit tickles you. Some chants describe the gods disguising themselves as insects or birds to spy on lovers, proof that even divine beings couldn't resist. Little gossip. You chuckle, realizing that curiosity about passion is as old as humanity itself, and maybe the gods were the first nosy neighbors. The night deepens, and the rhythm of the chants pulls you in, words rising and falling like surf, painting images of bodies moving with tides, of laughter carried on wind, of love surviving where rules say it should not. You notice that even when Europeans tried to suppress dance, movements lived on in small gestures, a flick of the hand or sway of the hip. That to an outsider seemed innocent, but to insiders told a whole story of desire and memory. It's like watching two layers of theater, one for the authorities, another for the people who know the code. Historians debate how much of this secret preservation was intentional subversion, and how much was simply habit too ingrained to erase. But you feel the thrill of hidden continuity. It reminds you of smuggling candy into a movie theater, except here the candy is culture, and the stakes are survival. You feel your chest tighten with admiration as you picture lovers carving their initials into driftwood, hiding the pieces inside canoes, so that every voyage carried a secret testimony of desire. The ocean became the archive, carrying evidence of affection where no missionary's hand could reach. And then you imagine the dawn after such nights, when everyone returns to work as if nothing happened. Yet under every woven mat, behind every chant, pulses the knowledge that intimacy is still divine. The outsiders might own the schools and churches, but they can never fully own the stories sung by waves. You stare out into the dark horizon, the stars wheeling overhead just as they did for navigators long before, and you realize that memory itself is an act of defiance. The gods are not gone. They are waiting in every laugh, every clandestine dance, every whisper that says, "We remember." And with that thought, the night feels alive again, sparking with quiet rebellion, daring you to keep listening, to keep watching, to never let the story end. The dawn that greets you now feels different, softer, as if the island itself has decided to lower its voice after so many centuries of struggle. And yet beneath that quiet, you sense a steady pulse of pride. You walk along a shoreline dotted with concrete houses and painted fishing boats, modern life humming in the distance, but everywhere you look the past flickers through like sunlight under waves. Young Polynesians gather with guitars, blending ancient chants into reggae rhythms. And when they sing of love, it is not merely romance, but a reclamation, a way of telling the world that desire once honored as divine has not been extinguished. Historians still argue whether today's cultural revivals are faithful reconstructions or creative reinventions. But perhaps that debate misses the point. The act of remembering itself is the triumph. You pause as a young woman explains how wearing a flower behind her ear is more than decoration. On one side, it signals she is taken. On the other, it announces she is open to meeting someone new. The gesture is playful, but it carries the echo of older rituals where blossoms marked not just beauty, but blessing. You smile at how something so small can hold the weight of centuries. An authentic story threads into the present. In Foucault's reflections on sexuality, he observed how societies use desire as a mirror of power. And here you see the opposite of suppression activists reclaim ancestral intimacy as power, organizing festivals that openly celebrate dances once labeled sinful. It feels like a circle closing, laughter restored to the places where silence once ruled. A quirky detail makes you chuckle. In some modern Polynesian weddings, couples still exchange garlands of shells or feathers instead of rings. They nod to their ancestors that also sidesteps the price tag of a jewelry store. You imagine jewelers frowning while islanders grin, and the rebellion feels delicious. As you wander further, you notice murals painted on walls, gods rendered in bright sprays of color, Tangaroa and Hina watching over busy streets. Children grow up seeing these figures daily, not as forgotten relics, but as companions in their own identity journeys. Even in classrooms, debates spark about how much of the old sexuality to teach, whether to frame it as history or living practice. The tension lingers, but the conversations themselves prove resilience. You realize that identity here is not about choosing between tradition and modernity, but weaving both. Just as ancestors once braided palm fronds into mats that could endure storms, you breathe the warm air, noticing the scent of fried fish mingled with motor oil, and the contrast is startling yet strangely comforting. Life moves on, but the sacred view of sex as gift remains alive in songs, in jokes whispered at feasts, in the way couples walk hand in hand without apology. Historians debate whether this reclamation risks romanticizing the past, painting it in brighter colors than reality. But you suspect the islanders know exactly what they are doing, shaping memory into something that heals rather than wounds. The guitars strum, children laugh, waves roll, and you feel the circle complete. From the myths of God's gifting desire, through centuries of ritual, repression, resistance, and renewal, you stand now at a shoreline where modern lovers kiss under. Neon lights yet still claim the same blessing their ancestors whispered under stars. And in that realization, you feel something soften inside you, a quiet invitation to let go of your own inherited shame and remember that intimacy, at its heart, is simply human, timeless, divine. The tide withdraws slowly, the horizon fades into pale gold, and your body loosens into the rhythm of the island's breath. The story does not end here, but for tonight you can rest, and so can you, carried gently on waves of memory and myth, until sleep folds over you like a woven mat dot. And now, as your eyes grow heavy, let the edges of the story blur like footprints washed by the tide. Imagine the hush of waves softening every thought, the scent of flowers drifting through open windows, and the warmth of night pressing like a blanket around your shoulders. Each image you've carried, the dances, the chants, the laughter, the whispered rebellions fades into a gentle hum, reminding you that history itself is a lullaby if you let it slow your breathing. There is nothing left to chase, no judgment to fear, only the calm rhythm of water and the quiet certainty that love has always found a way. Let your body unclench, let your thoughts drift, and allow the gods of sleep to take you by the hand. Rest now, deeply, peacefully, as the island sings you to dreams. End of script. Sweet dreams.